No one would buy him, abandoned without clothes. At the auction, until a special man took him in. The wind carried dust across the empty yard. Rusty chains knocked softly against a leaning gate, their clinks swallowed by the vast hollow air. Beyond, the auction ground lay silent now. Only scraps of straw and broken crates remained. Hours ago, it had been loud with shouts, haggling, the sharp crack of the auctioneer's voice. Now, it felt like a place that wanted to forget what had just happened. Daniel Price stepped off the wooden porch of the small supply store, adjusting his hat against the glare. His boots crunched over gravel as he scanned the emptiness. The others had gone buyers with their wagons loaded, sellers with their coin purses tucked deep. But in the far corner, near the shadow of an old livestock pen, something moved. At first, he thought it was just a tarp, fluttering in the breeze. Then the shape shifted, a thin shoulder, an elbow pulling closer to a narrow chest. Daniel slowed. The closer he came, the more the shape took form. A boy, no older than 12, sitting barefoot on the ground, knees drawn up tight. His skin was dusted in dirt, his ribs visible under the pale stretch of it. No shirt, no blanket, only a torn pair of shorts that barely clung to his hips. Daniel stopped a few feet away. The boy didn't look up. His head was bowed so low that his matted hair hid most of his face. "Where's your folks?" Daniel asked quietly. No answer, only the faint tremor of the boy's shoulders, as if he'd been holding himself still for hours and was running out of strength. Daniel's gaze drifted to the wooden post behind him, the frayed length of rope still tied there. Someone had cut it hastily, leaving fibers hanging loose. He didn't need to ask to know what it meant. The boy had been part of the auction, and no one had bought him. The sun was dipping lower now, throwing long shadows over the pen. Daniel could hear the faint rustle of crows gathering on the roof of the empty barn. A smell of old hay and dust hung in the air. He took off his coat slowly, not wanting to startle the boy, and knelt down. The boy's eyes flickered up for a second, dark, wide, and full of something Daniel recognized. Not just fear, a kind of hollow resignation, the kind you saw in someone who had stopped expecting rescue. Daniel draped the coat gently over the boy's shoulders. The boy flinched, then froze. Daniel stayed there, waiting. Somewhere deep inside, an old ache stirred in him, a memory he hadn't touched in years. Daniel stayed crouched, feeling the weight of the silence between them. The coat hung awkwardly over the boy's small frame, its sleeves drooping far past his hands. The fabric shifted slightly with each shallow breath. "You cold?" Daniel asked. The boy's eyes dropped again, and he shook his head, a tiny, almost invisible movement. Daniel had seen that before. The refusal to admit weakness. The quiet calculation. If I say yes, what will it cost me? A breeze swept through the empty pen, and the boy shivered despite his denial. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't need the whole story to know it was ugly. The rope fibers, the way the boy's feet were raw and scraped, the fact that no one had stayed behind for him, all of it painted enough of a picture. Daniel shifted his weight, resting his forearm on one knee. His own childhood rose in fragments, uninvited, the way memories did when you saw them in someone else's face. A shadowed hallway, the slam of a door, the sharp bite of cold on skin when you'd been thrown out to think about your manners, that long, quiet waiting to be let back in, unsure if the door would open again. He swallowed. The boy glanced sideways, as if checking for escape routes. He was poised like a stray dog, ready to bolt if a hand moved too fast. Daniel could turn around. He could walk back to his truck, drive the long dirt road home, close his own door behind him. The boy wasn't his responsibility. There'd be trouble too. Someone might come looking. And in a place like this, taking in another man's property could invite a kind of attention that didn't fade quickly. The safer choice was to leave him. Daniel stood, brushing dirt from his knees. The boy's head dropped even lower, and for a moment Daniel thought he'd misjudged, that maybe the kid didn't care either way. But then he saw it, the faint stiffening in the boy's shoulders, the subtle way his body leaned away, bracing for the sound of footsteps leaving. It hit Daniel in the gut, sharp and mean. That expectation of abandonment, that readiness to be left again. He took one step back toward the truck. The air felt colder. The boy didn't move. Daniel cursed under his breath, low enough not to carry. Then he crouched again, slower this time. "Can you walk?" he asked. The boy hesitated, then nodded. Once. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of jerky, holding it out without pushing. The boy's eyes flicked to it, then to Daniel's face. After a long moment he took it, his fingers trembling just enough for Daniel to notice. "Come on then," Daniel said. His voice was quiet, but something in it left no room for argument. He stood, and after a pause, the boy rose too. His bare feet made no sound on the dirt. Daniel led the way toward the truck. He didn't touch him, didn't rush him, just kept the pace slow enough for the boy to follow without feeling chased. By the time they reached the truck, the sun was low, and the shadows stretched long across the road. Daniel opened the passenger door and stepped back. The boy climbed in without a word. As Daniel started the engine, he knew the choice had been made, and there was no undoing it now. The first few miles passed in silence. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, but he could feel the boy watching him from the corner of his vision, not with curiosity, but with the tense, calculating look of someone trying to decide if they'd just jumped from one cage into another. They were halfway to Daniel's place when a dust cloud rose in the rearview mirror, a black pickup, moving fast. Daniel's gut tightened. Out here, you didn't drive that hard unless you were chasing something, or someone. The boy saw it too. His back stiffened, and his hand gripped the edge of the seat until his knuckles went pale. "Who is it?" Daniel asked. The boy didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the truck, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Daniel slowed, letting the pickup close enough for him to catch the glint of a chrome bull bar and the battered front plate. Recognition hit. It was Garrick's truck. Garrick Lang, a man known for trading in whatever the law turned its head away from. Livestock, stolen goods, sometimes people. The boy shifted in his seat as if bracing for impact. That told Daniel more than words could. He pressed the gas, not enough to draw suspicion, but enough to keep distance. "They the ones who left you at the auction?" The boy swallowed, his throat working hard, and nodded once. Daniel's jaw locked. Garrick's presence here wasn't just bad luck. This was pursuit, which meant the boy wasn't simply unwanted. He was wanted by the wrong kind of men. The black pickup stayed on their tail for another mile before turning off toward the south road. But Daniel knew it wouldn't be the last he saw of it. Garrick didn't give up easy, especially when there was money involved. Back at the ranch, Daniel pulled the truck into the barn rather than leave it in the open yard. The boy lingered by the door, scanning the tree line. His body was taut, ready to run. Inside the kitchen, Daniel poured 2 glasses of water. He set one in front of the boy and leaned against the counter. "Why were they selling you?" The boy's gaze dropped to the table. For a long moment, Daniel thought he'd stay silent. Then, in a voice hoarse from disuse, he said, "They owed money." Daniel waited. "They said I wasn't worth much, but enough to settle a part of it." He hesitated. "They said if no one bought me, they'd just take me back." Daniel's stomach turned. This wasn't just cruelty. It was business. Garrick and men like him treated human lives like cattle, and a boy who hadn't been sold was still an asset to reclaim. He knew then that the boy wasn't safe just because the auction was over. If Garrick's truck had already found them once, it could find them again. Out here, distance didn't buy safety. Secrecy did. Daniel rubbed his temple, feeling the weight of what he'd taken on. This wasn't a stray dog you could hide in the barn. This was trouble with a face and a name, and it was likely coming down his road sooner rather than later. The boy sat still, the coat still draped over his shoulders, but Daniel could see the exhaustion pulling at him. "Eat first," Daniel said, moving toward the pantry. "Then we'll figure out what comes next." The truth was, he had no plan yet. Only the certainty that letting Garrick take the boy back wasn't an option, no matter the cost. The next morning broke cold and pale, the kind of light that softened the sharp edges of the land. Daniel found the boy sitting on the porch steps, knees tucked up, staring at the frost on the grass. He hadn't heard him come out, which meant the boy had been there a while. Daniel didn't speak. Instead, he set a tin mug of warm milk beside him and went back to the woodpile. By the time he returned with an armful, the mug was empty. The hours fell into a quiet rhythm. Daniel mended a section of fence. The boy trailed behind, handing him nails without being asked. When Daniel split logs, the boy stacked them carefully, lining each one like it mattered. Midday, Daniel took down the old .22 rifle from above the mantel. He saw the boy's eyes follow it, not with fear but with a cautious interest. Out back, Daniel set up a tin can on a post. He showed the boy how to hold the rifle, how to rest the stock against his shoulder. The boy's hands were too small for a perfect grip, but his aim steadied with each breath. When the can finally clanged to the ground, Daniel saw something flicker across the boy's face, not quite a smile, but close. They ate dinner in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons on tin bowls. Halfway through, Daniel noticed the boy tugging at the sleeve of the coat. The fabric had slipped, revealing a thin, raised line running along his forearm. Not fresh, but deep enough to have left a mark. Daniel didn't ask. He simply rolled up his own sleeve, exposing a scar that stretched from wrist to elbow. The boy's eyes lingered there for a moment before he looked away, but something in his posture eased. That night, they sat by the stove. The fire's glow flickered across the boy's face, softening the hollows beneath his eyes. Daniel whittled at a scrap of wood, the shavings curling to the floor. After a while, he handed the boy the small carving, a rough shape of a horse. The boy turned it over in his hands like it was heavier than it looked. Before turning in, Daniel pulled an old quilt from the cedar chest and draped it over the couch where the boy would sleep. "You'll be warmer this way," he said. The boy didn't reply, but when Daniel checked back an hour later, the quilt was pulled tight under his chin. Over the next 2 days, a quiet bond formed, stitched together not by confessions, but by the small, wordless acts of care. Daniel taught him how to saddle a horse, how to tell when the water trough was freezing over. The boy began leaving half an apple on Daniel's plate without explanation, like a silent trade for the meals he was given. In those moments, the threat outside seemed far away. Garrick's truck, the auction, the rope. They all felt like shadows belonging to another life. But Daniel knew peace like this didn't last. It never did. And maybe that's why he found himself memorizing the sound of the boy's quiet footsteps on the porch, the way his shoulders loosened when he worked with his hands, the almost smile when the rifle's shot rang true. It was the kind of stillness that came before a storm, fragile, precious, and already slipping away. It was just after dawn when the sound came, a low growl of engines on gravel. Daniel had been mending tack in the barn, but the noise stopped his hands. He stepped to the open door and saw them. 2 trucks rolling up the drive, sunlight glinting off metal and glass. Garrick was in the first, leaning half out the window, his grin wide and cold. The boy was on the porch, frozen mid-step. Daniel's voice was sharp but calm. "Inside. Now." The boy obeyed, vanishing into the house without a sound. The trucks pulled up, kicking dust over the yard. Men climbed out, 5 of them, heavy boots crunching on gravel, rifles slung casual but ready. Garrick walked forward, hands open like this was just a friendly visit. "Morning, Price," he said, voice oily. "You got something of mine." Daniel stepped out from the barn, closing the distance between them slowly. "Didn't know people counted as property, Garrick." Garrick's smile didn't falter. "Boy was part of a debt settlement. Auction rules say if nobody buys, it reverts to the creditor. That's me." He tilted his head. "So I'm here to collect." Daniel could feel the weight of every eye on him. The air was thick, the only sound the faint click of a rifle being chambered behind Garrick. "You're not taking him," Daniel said. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Garrick's grin dropped. "I don't think you understand how thin the ice is under you, Price. Harboring someone else's property? That's theft in this county." Daniel knew the law out here wasn't written on paper. It was written by whoever held the most guns. Still, he didn't flinch. "Kid's not going anywhere with you." One of Garrick's men shifted, bringing his rifle up just enough to make the point. Daniel's fingers brushed the butt of his revolver, but he didn't draw. Not yet. From the porch, the screen door creaked open. The boy stood there, Garrick's coat in his hands. Only it wasn't Garrick's. It was Daniel's, and something heavy clinked in the pocket. "Get inside," Daniel barked, but the boy didn't move. His voice, when it came, was clear. "You're lying. You're not my creditor. You're my father's brother." The words cut the air like a blade. Garrick froze. The men glanced at each other. Daniel's mind spun. Uncle, not creditor. This wasn't about debt. It was about blood and something uglier beneath it. Garrick's voice sharpened. "You shut your mouth, boy." But now Daniel understood. Garrick wasn't reclaiming a debt. He was silencing a witness. Daniel moved first. His revolver cleared leather in one smooth motion. "You're leaving," he said, voice low. "Without him." One of the men raised his rifle. and the world tightened to a single thread of choice. Daniel stepped forward, putting himself between the boy and the guns. His heart hammered, but his voice stayed steady. "You fire, and you'd better pray you don't miss." The standoff stretched. Eyes locked, fingers tense on triggers, the morning light catching on steel. Finally, Garrick spat in the dirt. "You just bought yourself a war, Price." He signaled to his men, and one by one, they backed toward the trucks. Engines roared, tires spat gravel, and they were gone. For now. Daniel didn't move until the sound faded down the road. Only then did he turn to the boy, who was still standing on the porch, fists clenched around the coat. "You're safe," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure it was true, because men like Garrick didn't let go, not without blood. The next 2 days were taut as a wire. Daniel kept the rifle close and the truck hidden behind the barn. The boy hardly left the house, moving from window to window, eyes tracing every sound of gravel shifting outside. It was near midnight on the 3rd day when the headlights came. No roar of engines this time, just a slow crawl up the dirt road. Daniel was already at the door, rifle in hand. The boy hovered behind him, small fingers clutching the back of Daniel's shirt. The truck stopped at the gate. Garrick stepped out alone. The moonlight made him look older, smaller somehow, but the smirk was gone. He carried nothing in his hands. "Can we talk?" he called. Daniel didn't lower the rifle. "You've got 3 seconds before I tell you to turn around." Garrick took a breath. "You're right. I'm his uncle. And you're right again. I didn't come for debt. I came to keep him quiet. His father, my brother, he's dead now. Died the day after the auction. Took a bullet meant for me. And the men who pulled that trigger, they think the boy saw their faces." The boy's breath hitched behind Daniel. "They'll come for him," Garrick went on. "And I can't protect him. I barely keep myself breathing." Daniel searched his face, looking for the telltale twitch of a lie. But Garrick's shoulders sagged, his eyes fixed on the dirt. "This is me walking away," Garrick said finally. "You keep him. Hide him. Just don't tell me where. If they come asking, I can honestly say I don't know." He turned, boots crunching on gravel. At the truck door, he hesitated. "For what it's worth, Price, you've got more guts than sense." Then he climbed in, started the engine, and disappeared into the dark. Silence filled the yard again. Daniel didn't move for a long time, listening to the sound fade. Inside, the boy sat at the table, staring at the worn wood grain. Daniel set the rifle down and sat across from him. No words came. None were needed. The boy's hands were still tight in his lap, but his shoulders were looser now, as if some invisible weight had shifted. They didn't sleep much that night. At first light, Daniel loaded the truck with enough supplies for a long road. He didn't tell the boy where they were going. By noon, they were miles away from the ranch, the land rolling out in golden stretches. The boy leaned against the window, eyes half closed, the sun warming his face. They stopped only once, at a quiet bend in the river, where the cottonwoods leaned low. Daniel walked to the bank, pulling something from his coat pocket, the small wooden horse he'd carved. He set it on a flat rock, the water lapping just close enough to touch it. The boy stood beside him, watching. Daniel didn't explain. The gesture was enough. A marker, a memory, a promise that whatever had come before would not be what defined the road ahead. When they climbed back into the truck, Daniel glanced over. The boy met his eyes for the first time without flinching. The engine rumbled to life and they drove on, the river falling away behind them, the road unspooling towards someplace neither of them had seen, but both were willing to trust. Weeks turned into months. The boy grew into the spaces between them, filling the silence with small, steady acts. He fixed hinges without being asked, learned how to tend the horses, started leaving his boots by the door, like he meant to stay. They moved twice more, each place smaller and quieter than the last. In one town, they stayed long enough for the boy to join a school under a new name. In another, long enough for him to know which neighbor would lend sugar and which would ask too many questions. Daniel never spoke of Garrick again. The boy never asked. The past became something they both carried, but didn't set down where others could see. One winter evening, the boy, taller now, shoulders less hunched, stood in the doorway of the barn, watching Daniel oil a saddle. "You think they'll ever find us?" he asked. Daniel didn't look up. "Not if we keep moving forward." The boy seemed to consider that. then nodded. It was the first time he'd asked about the danger since they'd left the ranch, and Daniel knew it wouldn't be the last. But he also knew the boy wasn't asking out of fear anymore. It was something else, maybe a need to understand the shape of his own story. Spring came, and with it, a piece of land that felt like it might hold them for more than a season. A small cabin near the edge of a wide meadow. The first morning there, Daniel found the boy outside before sunrise, standing barefoot in the dew, looking out over the field. "What do you see?" Daniel asked. The boy's answer was quiet. Room to breathe. They built a fence together that summer. It wasn't much, just enough to mark the line between the world they'd keep and the world they'd leave outside. On the final post, Daniel carved a small horse into the wood. The boy ran his fingers over it, tracing the rough shape, and didn't say a word. Years later, when strangers passed through and asked if they were father and son, neither bothered to correct them. Time didn't erase the shadows, but it softened them. The boy still had nights where he woke with his breath sharp and his fists clenched. Daniel still kept the rifle close, but the space between those nights grew longer, and the mornings after were lighter. One evening, as the sun slid low and gold across the meadow, they sat on the porch in the kind of silence that didn't need breaking. The boy, nearly a man now, glanced at Daniel and said, "I'm glad you didn't walk away that day." Daniel looked out over the land, the carved post catching the last light. "Me too," he said, and the wind moved through the grass in a slow, rolling wave, carrying the words farther than either of them could see.